between policymakers, academia, and businesses with respect to this really important new topic. My name is Matilda Dorotic from BI Norwegian Business School, and as a co-chair of the AMA Summer Academic Conference this year, I wish to thank American Marketing Association for being so open to have this topic as a plenary topic, and who really supported us in trying to bring this topic forward. Emerging technologies and artificial intelligence in particular are creating unprecedented changes at individual, business, but also wide societal levels. So just looking at the number of papers that have been published recently on these topics, and also those presented in this conference so far, this is certainly one of the most important and hot topics nowadays. So the importance of this topic is really well understood. But what sometimes happens is that we all look at our own micro problems within this huge area. And what we feel important as co-chairs of this conference is to really bring those micro puzzles together into a big picture. Because this issue, or the emerging technologies in general, are affecting us at so many different levels, and they're really changing everything that we have been doing in the life as usual so far. For this reason, our goal in the session is to really bring together the insights from policymakers, academicians, and businesses who are all dealing with AI from different perspectives. And this is what you are going to see today. And as I said in the beginning, this idea has seemed huge, but I was so happy that all of our panelists from different backgrounds and with the different really issues that they are analyzing in AI have been so open to discuss the topics and to try to really bring these burning issues forward. We hope that this will inspire you to work towards trying to address more of the various dimensions of the AI impact. I wish to ask you all to use the Q&A option on your right to pose questions in the session. Now it is my privilege and my pleasure to introduce our panelists. We have really the great set of panelists today from all areas of AI applications, both in public policy, in academia, and also in businesses. Unfortunately, we seem to have issues with getting Graham from Dell Technologies to join due to some technical problems. We hope that he will be joining during the session. So now let me start with introducing our panelists. I will start with Mr. Irakli Berizek, who is the head of the Center of Artificial Intelligence and Robotics at UNICRI, United Nations. He has more than 20 years of experience in supporting governments worldwide on the strategies, action plans, roadmaps, and policy papers. And in particular, Irakli has been really instrumental in initiating and managing one of the first United Nations programs on AI in particular. He's a member also on various international task forces, including the World Economic Forum's Global Artificial Intelligence Council, the UN High-Level Panel for Digital Cooperation, the High-Level Expert Group of Artificial Intelligence of the European Commission, and so on. Thank you, Irakli, for joining us today. Lofred Matsu is a project lead of AI at the World Economic Forum, where he oversees global and multi-stakeholder AI policy projects. He's also a research associate at the Oxford Internet Institute, where he investigates various methods to audit AI systems. He has advised French government on technology policy, and he has written a chapter on the French AI national strategy that is entitled "What Ethics for AI." He works with AI governance in particular. Cansu Jansa is a philosopher and the founder of the AI Ethics Lab, where she leads a team of computer scientists, philosophers, and legal scholars together to provide ethics analysis and guidance to researchers and practitioners. She also serves as an ethics expert in various ethics advisory and editorial boards. She has a PhD in philosophy, specializing in applied ethics, and she works in particular in terms of ethics of technology. She was listed among the 30 influential women advancing AI in Boston and the 100 brilliant women in AI ethics. Thank you, Cansu, for being with us today. Professor Andrew Stephen is L'Oreal Professor of Marketing and Research Dean of State Business School, University of Oxford. He's also editor of Journal of Consumer Research. And we all know Andrew is a leading academic voice on the future of marketing. He also has been working extensively at this intersection of marketing, policy making, developing AI guidelines for businesses, and he is a strong proponent of analyzing the artificial intelligence using data-centric, analytic-enabled methods and approaches. At the University of Oxford, he is a director of the Oxford Future of Marketing Initiative, a very good source for all of us working on applying some of these topics of the future of marketing. So thank you, Andrew, for being with us. Thank you for your insights today. Graham is, I will introduce him very, very quickly. Graham has a role of senior management for business development in terms of the AI technologies at the Dell Technologies Alliances. He has been working, he has working experience with all sorts of different applications in terms of the AI in businesses, working with B2B sector, as well as working with governments, working with really implementing AI. We hope that Graham will be able to join us during this panel. Koen Pauwels is a distinguished professor of marketing at Northeastern University. He's also co-director of Digital Analytics Technology and Automation Initiative. He received his PhD from UCLA, and his award-winning research received over 12,000 citations. He is one of the people responsible or guilty for having us here and also having this session because he has, as the president of the American Marketing Association's Academic Council, accepted this topic as a plenary, and he has been very supportive in making this happen. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, panelists, for being with us. And with this, I would like to start by opening up a first round of individual answers, in which we will go through several aspects that our panelists highlighted from their work, after which we will have an open discussion, and hopefully you will all participate in it through your Q&A session. Okay, so I will start with Mr. Irakli Beritse. In your view, and we know that artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies have already had a profound societal impact, not only on businesses, but also on citizens and governments. What are, in your view, opportunities and main challenges of AI and emerging technologies for the achievement of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals?
Thank you, Matilda. Thank you very much. Before I get into the topic, I would like to thank the organizers to invite me for this conference. And I think that even if you look at the name of this panel session, it is extremely important to bridge that gap among practitioners, academics, international organizations, and others, because we are all together now shaping the new world, which is more than ever is needing to leverage the technologies like artificial intelligence and other related technologies, because we are entering in a completely new life. We've went through and sort of quite a profound shock now for the last year and a half or so with the COVID related, and the world which is going to open up in front of us is a world which is in a way is unknown to us, because this is not going to be the same what happened where we lived or how we lived a year and a half ago. We are going to experience numerous economic shocks, probably. Communities which were vulnerable may become even more vulnerable, and more than ever we need that type of conversations, how to bring in the technology, because technology on its own is actually growing exponentially. We do have the possibility to leverage them, but what we would need in the future is to bring the dialogue, to have this multi-stakeholder cooperation to take the best out of it. Now, at the same time, I would like to express my gratitude and share this panel with so many distinguished scholars, practitioners, and academics who are with us, my friends and colleagues. So thanks a lot for joining this panel. Now let's look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We have 17 goals, really ambitious agenda, which was set by the UN member states for Agenda 2030. And at the United Nations, what we started to do, starting from 2017, is creating a specialized forum, AI for Good Summits, which is organized by all UN agencies under the auspices of the ITU in Geneva. And we are testing the possibilities of the practical AI applications, how they can support United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And more than ever, this becomes extremely important. Now, AI can contribute to all goals and all indicators and targets of this, and through the technological improvement that helps to overcome a certain existing barriers. For example, I mean, there are many different applications we've been testing for development or contribution to these goals, and one of the main topics, main challenges which we are experiencing now is how to ensure that these technologies, these applications are applicable equally everywhere in the world, and not selected few countries are benefiting out of it. And that's a huge challenge, how to redistribute, how to ensure that technology gets to all parts of the world equally, that everyone has an opportunity. With this, I've been talking quite a lot with governments, how to ensure that governments adopt national strategies on artificial intelligence or digital strategies, and how to ensure the investments, their own or bringing investments from elsewhere, international organizations, specialized funds, to ensure that future generations are ready to apply the technology for good. They're ready to apply technology to achieve those sustainable development goals. Now, at the same time, what we are doing at the UNICRI Center for AI, we are promoting peaceful and inclusive. We are contributing to the to all goals, but specifically to the goal SDG 16, which is promoting peaceful and inclusive societies, providing access to justice, so all building effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions. And some of the practical applications or practical topics we are working on is how to ensure that, for example, law enforcement applies and uses artificial intelligence in a responsible way, in a human rights compliant way. We are also contributing to the SDG 16.2 by implementing a specialized project to ensure that artificial intelligence is used to combat abuse of children online. It's quite a large undertaking under our auspices. Now, and one last point which I would like to underline, that AI, from our point of view, is a powerful technology which will bring a lot of good, but only if it's used in a human rights compliant manner, without eroding human rights, without deepening inequality or exacerbating existing discriminations. And this is extremely important point from our side, so that we ensure that the technology will bring good, it will bring benefits, but minimize we should ensure that we will minimize the risk which could be associated to that. Now back to you, Matilda.
Thank you very much, Irakli. What I also want to point out as a very good thing that you are promoting is actually this interdisciplinary collaboration. Irakli has been really open to all sorts of research insights that are coming from marketing academia, from behavioral sciences as well. And Uniquely is proving to be one of the institutes that is really trying to merge together interdisciplinary research and bring in more insights from various areas. Going on in terms of the new insights, the insights from marketing, I'm going to ask Andrew Stephen next. We know that as consumers and citizens, we are all profoundly affected by the new technologies, which are creating tensions and paradoxes between their ability to provide increased efficiency to us and the downsides of affecting our privacy, controlling our choices, or classifying us in ways that we do not like. What are the burning issues in the human AI interactions that marketing scholars should address in the future, in your view? Thank you.
All right, and thank you for having me. I know I've only got a few minutes to talk about these burning issues, but we could probably talk for a few hours. But before I go into some specifics, actually, I just want to kind of link to the point from Irakli around sort of an interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary approach to this, because it's so important. And I mean, I'm going to hone in on sort of business and marketing stuff. But you know, a lot of the perspectives I have come from talking to colleagues who are philosophers, or even on my team I've got postdocs who come from computer science, sociology, law, mathematics. I've even got a biologist on the this sort of approach where there's multiple perspectives, I think is really, really important. Then when we think about that in the context of marketing, even then when we kind of narrow down there, I think this sort of multiple perspectives is important. And there, maybe, thinking from an academic standpoint, this is where we really need to be thinking not only, what our little view of the world is, but listening to, consumers or users of these technologies, most of whom don't really understand how they work, and perhaps nor do they need to understand the magic, yet their lives are affected in one way or another, but also to the business leaders who are overseeing all of this. And so, I think a lot of the burning issues, when we want to think about it from a marketing academic or marketing scholar angle, naturally we'll hone in on, well, how should businesses best use these tools for marketing? Or, what do consumers think about, algorithms that refer them to things or give them recommendations, or so we can think about those practical uses. I think over top of that, though, there's this sort of I would say almost burden on us as academics to make sure that we're not just thinking about these very new issues and new technologies and new sets of big societal issues from an old-fashioned marketing academic way. And I don't mean that in a bad sort of, I'm not saying there's anything bad with old-fashioned marketing approaches, but this really is different. And I think we need to therefore open up our minds a little bit to think about that. I mean, as you've got on the slide, I think that there's a few thoughts that have immediately come to mind when I was thinking about this. And I think the first one is as it says there, well, what interactions are we talking about now and the ones into the future? And this is where, we do need to think in a more, I guess, open way, see what companies are developing, see what they're playing with, see what's coming out of, sort of the big research labs within academia, but also within the big tech companies. What's Microsoft doing, what's Google doing, what's Facebook doing, etc. And then thinking in terms of, well, how could that be used in a customer journey, for example? So maybe it's not there now, but maybe it will be, and we need to maybe start thinking about those things. And I'm always someone who likes research and would certainly encourage research. Is I guess a editorial statement I'm making from JCR, but encourage research that isn't isn't just looking at stuff that's already really well established. I think it's perfectly fine to look at things that are emerging. In this case, ways that consumers might interact with certain AI related technologies. It's, that's fine. It doesn't have to be already pretty ubiquitous to say it's important enough. I think these are already important. The other, and then other angles there, I sort of would say that are important from a research standpoint that we can really, I think, as marketing scholars better understand and contribute more widely is well, this level of comfort. I mean, I think a lot about sort of, when I think about AI ethics, and I'm sure we'll come to it later, I sort of think about risk and risk perceptions, and you can think about that from a business perspective, but increasingly also from a citizen perspective or an individual perspective. And how do we understand how people, grapple with decisions around their data or which recommendations to follow, or whatever it might be. How comfortable are people? What are the trade-offs that they make when they're making decisions around, essentially engaging in sort of the AI ecosystem, and which then leads, of course, to all the ethical dilemmas that companies need to face. And I think we can have a perspective there, and sort of bringing the business perspective into that, which is not dissimilar, I think, to the public policy perspective, but obviously has to be thought of in a few additional ways because of sort of the nature of business. But anyway, I'll stop there. But I think it's a fascinating field, and I think marketing academia really can contribute a lot, not only to our own little bubble, but to wider discussions and debates happening in other disciplines.
Thank you, Andrew. Thinking about the impact on citizens, thinking about the policy making, I would like to invite Lofred Madzu to give a few words about his experiences. To start with, we are talking about numerous different studies. For example, the Boston Consulting Group has recently published a survey reporting that majority of organizations implementing AI indicate that they are developing guidelines for responsible AI deployment. All of them do that. Yet less than 20% have fully implemented the systems for responsible AI, and more than half of those institutions are in essence overestimating their level of progress in implementing responsible AI. So my question to Lofred is, the World Economic Forum is very deeply involved in the global effort to co-design appropriate governance frameworks for AI through its various policy projects. What are the regulatory trends that you observe, and how companies can prepare for this environment?
Well, first, thank you for having me. I'm really pleased to be part of that panel. And to address directly question, I'm going to go through a two-step process. First is the diagnostic, how we got here, and then what are the possible trends. I think there's a growing acknowledgement across different segments of society, but starting from civil society and academia, because of the mounting reports of either dubious or ineffective or inappropriate or biased AI systems that have been deployed in the market for the last decade or so. So there's a growing acknowledgement that and feeling across different segments, again, stemming from research in academia and report from the news, but across civil society, academia, and business communities, that many AI systems have been deployed without being properly vetted. So as with this acknowledgement, the question becomes, what should be the right governance processes to make sure that the systems that we deploy are consistent with our set of requirements? So I think here the key word here is good governance. And as there's a growing awareness, there's incentives in the industry, but also coming from the pressure from policymakers, but I insist in the industry to put the right processes in place to maximize the benefits of AI, because there are plenty of benefits. Otherwise, we won't have that discussion in the first place. So I don't want to cast any bad shade on AI. It has a lot of benefits, but we need to have the right governance processes in place. And it starts by the practitioners. It starts with the industry, as there's a reckoning across society with that need. This brings me to my second point. Good governance is primarily a business imperative. So as we know now, the European Commission has published its proposal on the AI Act that plans to, it's pretty much a pretty broad regulatory proposal to ensure that AI is being deployed properly. It's a risk-based approach. And now it seems that AI governance tends to be approached for regulation. I would like to move away from this by saying that it is first a business imperative. Because the real issue for me at the moment, going back on the vetting issue process, is how do you ensure that your model or your systems deliver the value that you claim to be delivering for all the stakeholders impacted by your system? And that starts with AI quality management. And I'm really excited about the development that I observe in the market, because there's a growing responsible AI entrepreneurship market, startups market, sorry, both in the US, but also in the EU, that helps businesses across various dimensions of good governance, privacy, obviously, but think about accountability, think about explainability, think about robustness, reliability, and so forth. These are all the dimensions of AI quality, and we see interesting developments in the market. So what I'm saying in the future was we're going to see a fragmentation of the regulatory environment globally. And I want to insist on that fragmentation. And fragmentation is not necessarily bad. There's different kinds of fragmentation. But first, why we're going to see this? Because simply we're seeing different dynamics. As we all know, the EU is taking the lead in this responsible AI discussion and wants to use this to promote, I would say, European approach to AI development that differs from that of the US, which is more like a laissez-faire approach, or a more interventionist approach that we can observe in China. So the EU wants to trace a different way. Fragmentation as well, because it reflects the cultural differences, the legal, I would say, the jurisdiction, like the legal environment in which the technology is being deployed, and also the pace of AI adoption versus the time of policy implementation. So again, that fragmentation is quite normal. My hope, though, again, that's why I'm going back to the private sector, and I'm really pleased to attend that conference because the Marketing Association is obviously working closely with industry, is that I think they have, again, regulators are catching up, but I think that by making sure that the systems are delivering value to all the stakeholders that interact with these systems, and as I said, achieve high level of quality across the different dimensions that I've mentioned, the requirements I've mentioned, they're going not only to differentiate themselves from their competitors and taking the edge, because I think that ultimately trusted AI systems is going to create a competitive advantage for companies that are taking the lead on this, and those who won't take that turn will be pushed out of the market. So I hope I'll address the question.
Thank you very much, Lofred. Talking about the ethics, we're moving on to another person who can really add to what Lofred was also saying now in terms of the ethical principles in AI. There are many of them, and Lofred was also saying there are so many different ethical AI principles and guidelines developed by companies and governments around the world. What are the main challenges for their successful deployment? How far can they take us in developing and using ethical AI systems? Cansu, what do you think?
Thank you, Matilda. So I think the way you frame the question also for Lofred is very relevant. A lot of the companies are developing these guidelines, but they are having a hard time really making it happen. And it's interesting because I think we need to first ask the question, why are they developing these guidelines? I think that sort of is forgotten in the excitement of responding to the, in some sense, public need for them to say, hey, we have some ethical guidelines and here they are. The way to think about them is, well, we need these in order to make decisions. So they need to be in such a format that they can guide decision making. By they, I mean AI principles and AI guidelines, AI ethics principles and AI ethics guidelines. To do that, the set of AI principles they put forward, or whatever document that they are putting forward, has to be coherent. Putting together random and good-looking, good-sounding principles doesn't get you anywhere unless you can really think about the trade-offs and why do you have that principle in the list rather than another one. So Andrew mentioned having multidisciplinary teams. That's super important because I think that's where the philosophy comes very handy. We cannot talk about implementing fairness or optimizing fairness before defining what definition of fairness we are talking about and what definition of fairness we should be talking about given the type of sector that we are in, given the type of company that we are talking about. So the structure of these principles matter a lot, and the clarity, because again, a lot of the times we have these vague words that are like smuggled into those documents saying like in appropriate times we should make these decisions, under control we are going to make decisions, and they are, as anyone who reads them realizes, that they are escape ways for companies to say, well, we didn't think it was appropriate, or we didn't think this was the right, this required more control. What we need is clear language. Once we have that document, then we can work around it. And what these documents really need to show is that, look, we do have ethics principles and ethics frameworks within philosophy. We have them for thousands of years. I'm not exaggerating. The point of developing new principles, sets of principles, and we have right now, you mentioned this as well, but we have over 100 sets of them at the moment. It is really to show what your company prioritizes, what your company organization thinks about these trade-offs. Again, Andrew mentioned the individual trade-offs, and here we also have the organizational trade-offs. You know, what do we think? What does the company try to say when they say privacy rather than saying, let's say, accuracy? Does that mean anything? What you omit means as much as what you include. But a lot of the times these are not really built with this care. And once we have that, it's very difficult to operationalize them. In order to have that set of guidelines really workable, we need to have we need to start using them, which means we will build use cases, we will build precedents. We are going to have a mechanism around these principles that really embeds them into the business operations. And again, in order to embed them, we also have to make sure that they align with the other values of these organizations, the businesses. And there are levels of operationalizing it. So by which I mean there are levels of ethical decisions, levels of complexity, and levels of risk that an ethical question provides, should correspond to different ethics staff. So your complex questions should go to an ethics expert or ethics expert team, but your policy questions should go to an advisory board probably, because you have to really match this with your overall goal of the business. And everyday questions, you cannot have experts everywhere in each team, but so you will have these trained team leads that will bring those questions up to the expert group or up to the advisory board. So we have to have this chain of staff and chain of procedures within the business in order to do anything with these principles. Having them is great, but not being able to use them makes them sort of like a window decoration. And for that, we need to really think about this ethics and the principles as a starting point, and ethics as a decision-making structure. So we developed this PI model in puzzle solving and ethics model in AI Ethics Lab, where we are trying to make sure that we integrate ethics into the operation with everything that I just mentioned, and making it as a collaborative puzzle solving structure rather than this this approval you get or a checklist that you fill up. So I'll leave it at this for now.
Thank you very much, Cansu. I fully agree with you. We actually, you see, slowly by hearing all of those talks, slowly we are creating these small puzzles together, don't we? From looking at the same thing from many different perspectives also makes us richer, but leaving it only at words makes it non-applicable. Thank you very much, Cansu. I will move to Koen, who can I? Yeah, thank you. Koen, who should be in control of all of this? we were talking about many different aspects. Of course, data, and you are the data guy. You are really one of the names in this field talking about data, big, small, medium-sized data. Who should control the data, individuals or machines? Who is nowadays providing the key performance indicators of the business, managers or data scientists?
Well, thanks so much for giving me the easy questions, Matilda. so I mean, the answer to the first one is straightforward, with an asterisk. So of course, it's individuals that remain in control of their data. That's the spirit of GDPR, all of the US thinking also that goes behind it. Just to give you one example about what that means. So if you decide to it means they write your data out, not just you as an individual, but out of all of their summarized metrics that are going on from day to day. So you can imagine kind of what that needs to happen in the back office to make that happen. But it is going on. The other important part, I think, is that privacy is really, it's both a business imperative and it's a social responsibility. So this morning, the AMA had this wonderful workshop on privacy as a social responsibility by Kelly Martin and Kristen Walker that goes much deeper into what can we as researchers actually do to think about this and to help that process. Just last month, I was in the Netherlands. My good friend Rob Peters, he works for this in the province of Utrecht. Oh, I don't think you can see it. And so he gave me this booklet about the democratic meaning of data. And so they go into several case studies of what you can actually do to have impact on this one. One of the ones that I liked was called the snuffelfiets in the Dutch. So that's the snuffling bicycle. So they basically wanted to give citizens the opportunity to put monitors on their bicycle. And as you know, in the Netherlands, everything happens by bicycle, to measure the air pollution, something that was very dear to their hearts. And so it talks about how you first work with volunteers, get the data, then how do you scale that up? Because you need representative data, and you also need to then deal with the privacy of these of the people that you're trying to help. And so just as you have doing wonderful efforts in Norway about how to develop smart cities, I think that's just a wonderful area of research there. The other thing about kind of what happens to KPIs. So I think for KPIs, it's really the managers who should be in charge there. It's the stakeholders, including the decision makers, consumers, that really have to say what the purpose is of the modeling exercise of collecting the data in the first place. Just to give you an example, so one youth project I've been involved in deals with basically looking at just electronic signals, so online signals of consumers to come up with measures for awareness and considerations for brands. So huge undertaking. We had more than 600 of these metrics. And then, of course, you know, we need some kind of a cool machine learning. Which one kind of satisfied the hierarchy of effects that we like in marketing. But the most important thing, besides consumer privacy, was to make sure we could explain it to the stakeholders. And we could do this by starting from great conceptual framework to say, hey, this is how it should look like, and this is how these metrics should behave before going to the whole, machine learning exercise. The best metrics and the best metrics. The other thing I noted there is that, what does it really mean when AI is so important in AI-human interactions? I think for marketers that has two main implications. Number one, we'll have to market to machines. And so I brought this up on my blog for several years now in my expectation for the next year, and I'm very much looking forward to digging deeper in this in that context. But so in marketing, we are constantly thinking about selling our marketing to humans and understanding what their needs are, developing better products for them, and so forth. But if it's mostly going to be algorithms that make the shortlist for humans, right? So that we as a human will say, well, I can't decide between 1,000 shampoos or jams, right? As for instance, the wonderful jams in Turkey, I can't really decide which one to try first. humans are very comfortable now having AI make the shortlist, and then they choose among those. So in that kind of context, how do we make sure, as we are responsible for a company and a brand, how do we make sure we get on that AI shortlist? What are the decision criteria? And how can we influence that is something that that I haven't seen enough development yet, personally. The flip side of that is, and that is my last point there, so I see consumers, citizens become much more comfortable with these smart choices and smart cities. And we had a wonderful presentation, I think, on Wednesday on the opening of the conference by Emmanuel Stagno and also by René Richardson, that there's some consumers that are much more comfortable with AI in citizenship and in street settings than other people. But I see this comfort growing, and I'm personally fascinated by the reverse of allowing AI make the shortlist. If you think about it the other way around, so Spotify, for instance, is one of the only examples that I know that you don't have the decision power anymore about which music gets shown to you. So instead of AI making the shortlist and the human deciding, I'm looking forward to a time where I make the shortlist. I have my criteria. I only want, let's say, Alexa to recommend brands to me that are socially responsible, have my purpose, have certain criteria. But then I want AI to make the final choice for me. I don't want to kind of decide within my shortlist. And so if you flip that decision model around of AI and humans, what are the implications? What should we do about this? And what are the potential challenges and dangers for potential manipulation of consumers? So wonderful kind of question, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Koen. This is really, food for thought, I would say, from all of the panelists. So what I would like to do next is give you a little taste of how it was for me when I was sitting with these panelists and how interesting it is when they start interacting about AI from different perspectives. You can join the discussion through Q&A. Hannah and I will try to include your questions as well. I'm now opening up for our panelists. Please ask your questions to other panelists or comment on some of the things that others have said, because I know you're eager to, and and we all truly enjoy hearing it. Who would like to go first?
Well, I can actually open a topic, Matilda, if it's okay. We've been talking quite a lot about the principles, and we've talked about how important that is. And actually, we've been all involved in developing of all different type of principles from sort of a different sectors. From my side, we've been working quite a lot on the law enforcement, which is quite a sort of a bleeding edge side of the application of the artificial intelligence now, very sensitive, very important to get it right. And what I'd like to sort of open is that how to ensure that we translate principles into practical actions, because that's the real time now has come. From what we are doing now is that we're developing a specialized toolkit together with Interpol to ensure that law enforcement uses artificial intelligence in a responsible way. So this is a real practical application of those principles. I believe this is important, but I want to hear opinions. How do we ensure that that kind of a journey is in a way short journey so that everybody benefits out of it? Otherwise, we can be talking for many, many years and we will not have anything sort of a practical at our hands. But at the same time, how to ensure that we are not rushing into the process so that we are not creating some guidelines which will be actually counterproductive to achieve the results. So to keep that type of a balance.
Excellent. Who wants to start?
That is the question, isn't it? I can pick it up on this one, because I'm also working with Irakli on this one. Just two comments on this. The first one is, before we can profitably design the right principles, we need to come to terms with what AI can do and cannot do. I couldn't insist enough on many dubious and bad applications of AI, period. Now, that would move that away. I think it's really important to get close to the use case as much as possible, because the most damaging approach was to start from high-level principles, reflecting on like, I'm not a philosopher by training, so no shot to any philosopher, right? But with high-level like principles and considerations, let's start with what is the use case. So being very concrete, if law enforcement use it, what type of crime, what are the criteria in place, how the biometric is collected, where it is stored, how it is being processed, and so forth. Once you have a really good sense of what is the use case, now you can start thinking about what are the stakeholders that should be involved in that design process. So these are again like preliminary steps. It doesn't mean that you are going to land the right principle, but it's going to make sure that you're not completely off topic. And I think that many like principles out there are not really actionable because they're just completely remote from any practical applications. That have been thought in any like practical context. So that's just my first comment to kick it off.
Maybe I can jump in because I completely agree with this sort of let's be practical kind of thing, because we sort of need to approach it from both, I guess top down, bottom up, whatever way you want to think about it. And there's so much, I think, Jansu, you'd mentioned there's like, hundreds of different, corporate guidelines and other sort of, intergovernmental organization guidelines for all of this. And actually when, at Oxford, one of the things that we developed, actually the International Chamber of Commerce came to us, which for those who aren't familiar, it's sort of the world, very, very, very large, membership organization representing interested business, millions of businesses around the world, including a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, and including businesses in, developing markets as well as the developed world. And they said, look, our members, they want guidelines. Can we, figure out how to sort through all of this, because there's just so much and jargon and complexity and not practical and maybe more designed for Google or Microsoft than for small business that might operate a few convenience stores in a town and wants to do something with their customer data, which is still it's maybe small AI perhaps, but it's a relevant use. And so we sort of try to do that and sort of simplify without taking away the necessary complexity, because I think if we oversimplify it, then we're also doing a disservice. But then the other sort of interesting thing that I think we've been finding is back to kind of the business use case bit. I see that as sort of one of the buckets of sort of ethical risk around, sort of appropriate and responsible use of AI. I mean, there's obviously the data aspects, there's algorithmic aspects, but I think business use, because you've got this sort of hype that says this thing's magic, and as it gets kind of more accessible, more democratized, and it's a worry because people don't know what it can do, what it can't do. And so now, at Oxford, we're spending a lot of time with senior executives, as well as actually senior civil servants, particularly in the UK government at the moment, and sort of in the security services, to help them kind of look under the hood and understand, like go through the mystique of all of this stuff. Because the other risk for them actually is the snake oil salesman coming out and telling them all, and that's then just a waste of resources. And so back to the point about business use cases and practicality, I think we also need to train business people who aren't technical experts on how to kind of think about this in all the different multifaceted ways that they need to think about it.
Let me also jump in here. Sorry, go ahead. So I completely agree. I think the use cases and starting from the practice is very reasonable also because, I mean, again, as I said, we actually have the general framework. Like ethics has not get to the practice. This is the first time that it's coming to the practice. I come from public health ethics. So as I said, I'm trained in applied ethics and I come from public health ethics. It's not, we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. And I think there are two different layers of question. One is like, what is, when we look at a sector, so law enforcement or healthcare, what are the principles that we must prioritize? What are the things that we cannot really let go? I mean, obviously, like in public health, for example, if you're developing AI for public health, well, you should not let go of well-being. That doesn't make much sense. So there are principles that we cannot just sort of like put aside. But then we also have to look at from the company's level, within that framework that is developed for your sector, what are your priorities as a company? What do you sort of stand for? And there are, I think also there is another two things. One is that this is about building good guidelines for the sector and for the companies. Another thing is like making them really usable, sort of like having a user experience, interface. So we need to develop tools that non-philosophers, non-ethics experts can use. They can at least start thinking about it. And preferably we need to have like workshops that help them. And this goes for all levels, right? Like for researchers, but also for the leadership, for the C-suite. How should they think about the ethical questions? What are the types of trade-offs that they should think about and that will get them into trouble if they don't think about? So all of these, I think, super relevant in order to bring it down, bring it to action.
Excellent. I'm bringing in just before Kun, because I think you're going to also touch upon it a little bit. So Kisan Joseph has asked a question: how do we create principles when the scope, nature, and applications of this technology is itself evolving? So it's one of the questions of how do we really create something stable when everything is evolving? Kun, can you maybe start with this, or just give your comments?
I completely agree with what was said before, right? Specifically, Andrew, it has to be practical. So this is one of the things that I love to teach: first the case study and then the principles. So to give you just one example, right? So in my course on marketing analytics, I very happily use the case by our colleagues Eva and Ayelet. And it's basically about a small company, right, that has a certain question about who it should give a discount to. And so we're focusing on consumers that put something in their cart, but didn't actually buy it. So in the first case, they don't have enough information. They just see where these consumers come from, what they do, and so forth. And so we come up with certain algorithms that say, well, if you give the 20% discount to those kind of folks with those kind of behavior, then it's most profitable for your company. Then in the second part, we give them demographic data, and it turns out that all of the discounts are going to white guys, and specifically minority women are not getting the discounts. And then the question is, should the company do anything with that information? And so last year in my course, I had 3 minority women presenters, and 2 out of the 3 says, I don't see any problem with that whatsoever. I mean, yeah, it may be bad, but a company has to make money. Come on. And so then kind of, turning around who the decision maker is and how you would feel about it as a consumer, that led to an absolutely fascinating discussion. And then later on, you can talk about the ethics frameworks and you can see how that's set. But if you start from the specific problems in the area, right, whether it's law enforcement or marketing, I think that's absolutely fantastic. I do agree that the ethics principles haven't changed much. So I would love to hear about the PI framework more, Jansu, because that sounds delicious to me. But I mean, going back to my days at Tux, our ethics professor, he showed 4 ethical frameworks, and then we had case studies. So 1 week I came with a case in marketing, 1 week somebody came with a case in accounting, a case in finance. And so we had a very good view about it matters practically in your discipline that you're going to make decisions in. But then here are some pretty timeless principles that you can apply there.
I have one attendee here who is also now bringing in the consumers or citizens side in it, and I think that this area is also very close to me. So I think this question could go to Irakli. What it says is, how would you protect consumers or citizens while policymakers catch up with the enforcement of proper rules to deal with AI? Do you think that investing in AI literacy would make a difference? So how do we really protect people while the rest of us is really trying to find these guidelines and solutions and implement or find the proper rules?
No, it's an excellent question. I mean, on the one hand, we are experiencing right now, and there's been a case for a long time that technology is being developing faster than any policy making organs or any policy makers could catch up with proper framework. So we do always have that type of a danger where the people, consumers, citizens could be at risk of being exposed to something which is not regulated or which is not properly sort of understood in such a way. Obviously, the education, literacy, investment of in this type of fields is always very beneficial, and in the future, this is going to be really critical to catch up with a fast-changing world. And I've said it in the beginning of my introduction when I said that we are entering into a world which is really unknown, and in some sense, it could be an extremely dangerous world as well if we don't properly manage to see how to ensure the benefits from technologies like AI, which is exponentially growing, and at the same time, how to ensure that the groups which are becoming vulnerable, and these consumers we're talking about, could be understood as also vulnerable groups, because not only the economic vulnerability we're talking about here, but we're talking about social vulnerability as well. And if we don't ensure that type of knowledge and education is sort of displayed and made into the more sort of a wider spectrum of the public, that vulnerable groups can become extremely sort of put into a very weak situation, and we will end up living in a very dangerous or very strange world, which from the UN perspective or for personal perspective, we won't want to be living. Therefore, it is extremely important right now to get all of this right and get it fast as well, without rushing into it and making irrational decisions.
Excellent, thank you. I see Andrew nodding. Andrew, you're probably the person I should also ask both of those questions that our audience is asking. What do you think? In what way do we really start understanding and approaching this customer or citizens perspective in all of this?
Well, I mean, I think there's a few aspects to this. So I think, you know, there's that. So one of them is, you know, how do we, and I think it becomes more of a business or corporate responsibility to think about this, because quite often, back to kind of the point about dynamics, you know, things are moving fast, different use cases apply in different ways. We can't necessarily rely on regulation or governments to necessarily deal with all these things. So I think that's why embedding a lot of this in business is really, really important, and sort of the notions of responsibility and all of that. So I think that's one way to think about kind of protect the consumer and whose responsibility it is. The other thing, actually, I think is just an informed citizen or an informed consumer. And you know, one interesting conversation I was having recently with people involved in sort of setting education policy here in the UK is they're rethinking I guess you'd call it the IT curriculum for elementary school kids, because they don't need to teach them how to use an iPad or, you know, the user interface stuff that they used to have to spend time on, they don't need to spend time on. And so they're replacing that with basic programming skills, with robotics. They're replacing it with sort of data literacy or you know, particularly around privacy and safety, and then thinking about, you know, even up to maybe as early as sort of 5th grade, starting to bring in some AI and machine learning type concepts. And so this is, you know, that would be a national overhaul of certain, you know, and I'm sure other countries are thinking similar things, but, you know, why not start early? You know, obviously we've also need to worry about our, you know, I think of my elderly 75-year-old mother who might get, you know, duped and get trapped in phishing scams or something like that, you know, with nefarious actors online. But maybe that's a lost cause. Maybe we need to think about the up and coming generations and just make them more informed on how these things work, so that then they can make better choices, or they can try and, you know, sort of vote with their wallet, so to speak, and give their custom to businesses that do allow them to make better or more informed choices. So I think the consumer has to take responsibility here, but we need to think about the next generation of consumers, I think, perhaps more than we do, because we don't usually think about kids. Like in marketing academia, how often do we study kids? I mean, it's hard to do, and but we maybe need to start thinking about younger populations.
Thank you. Talking about this, talking about the adverse effects that AI can have on citizens, on customers, and identifying these challenges. Lofred, one of the things that World Economic Forum and you personally have been doing is really identifying and working with these opportunities and challenges going forward with implementing AI. One of these challenges is certainly algorithmic bias, and now you see, based on our previous questions and discussion, why this is an aspect that needs to be raised. So, in terms of the algorithmic bias, or the fact that AI may replicate and exacerbate human bias and discrimination, what do you think are the pressing issues that need further understanding in algorithmic bias prevention for sustainable AI technology deployment?
That's a big question, and I will say that algorithmic bias is ultimately linked to AI quality. I go back to the cannot do what the claim you make, because again, if it starts by, okay, let's look at a really concrete example. You have a lot of claims about AI in hiring, for instance, right? We know that it's a domain where historically have been human bias, and now you're implementing, machine learning. If you have a decent understanding of what machine learning does, and if you have like the record of who you have been hiring for the 10 years, like over the last couple of years, it doesn't take long to get a sense of how your system is likely, the learning system that you built is likely to replicate the trends or the patterns that you had previously in your hiring practices, right? So, I would like to move away from like the bigger like algorithmic bias, kind of, because otherwise we get caught into something like very high level. Again, let's get concrete and get close to a use case in healthcare, in education, and so forth. How bias manifests, right? And the only way for me to get this right is to get a sense of how the systems are being designed, what are the historical, trends and biases that we have in the domain, and how we can confront them in the first place. And that's for me the most important. Otherwise, and I think I'm going to give you a really concrete example on facial recognition. There's a lot of concern regarding facial recognition and obviously like ethnic bias. But it turns out that the performance of your system on various demographics is really tied to data sets. So my point here is, if you make a concrete effort to have a better data set or more diversified data sets in relation to the use case that you have, you're likely to reduce algorithmic bias, right? So again, if you have like a really practical approach of it and tied to the product that you are building, you can make it tractable and address that problem significantly. But we need to move away from the high level, I think, concern about algorithmic bias, because it doesn't mean much thing, right? Ultimately, it's a learning system with a tied to a product in a specific use case. And that's at that level we can solve that issue.
Thank you, Lofred. I would go to Jansu. Jansu, what your comment is on the previously asked aspects. What do you think? When I know that in your TED Talks you have been talking about why consent or the current system of asking for consent with long-term conditions and clauses that customers need to read. This satisfies the criteria of ethical use and deployment of technology. What's your comment are here linking it to the issues that others have raised before?
I can give you one very short answer, which is no, it's not ethical. the current use of consent, or let's put it this way, the current pretense of using consent with those terms and conditions, privacy releases, and all of those things are just not ethical. And what I mean by not ethical is that we know by all those social science researchers and studies and the behavioral science research, we know that people do not read all of these documents, and we also know, looking at how much they should read, how much time they should spend reading these, they actually, in some sense, ethically should not read those documents, because that would be a waste of their time, immense waste of their time. So consent has been a problem concept from the very beginning, because it's in some sense, of course, we need it. That is a way of respecting individual autonomy, a very important way of respecting individual autonomy. And it comes from the side, well, if I'm going to do something on your body, medical ethics or research ethics, if I'm going to research on your body, well, I should definitely ask you about that. But it becomes much more problematic when we say that by giving you pages and pages of financial information, I actually got your consent when you signed it in the 3 minutes after I gave you. Similar things, we can study this very easily, you know, how fast people click on cookies and so on. No, we are not reading, we should not be reading. But there's another thing, if you don't say yes to all of these terms and conditions, your life gets really difficult. Your digital life becomes very difficult. So it's not really a fair game consent structure either. And taking it somewhat back to the user experience, user interface thinking, we should not get stuck with the, we should not just use the old concepts and try to just, really not really make them repurpose, but it's more like make fun of them. Just pretend like we are using these old concepts to answer these questions. We should really think about, well, do we need consent? Under what conditions we need consent? And if we do, what kind of user interface we should have for this? We are talking about digital world. It's not the traditional, let's sit down with the clinician and understand everything structure. So we cannot pretend that a click is a communication. And another thing, I'm going to go back to what Kon asked about the delicious pie model quickly. So the name, by the way, comes from my two loves, you know, ethics and food. But the basic idea is that we have to think about ethics as dynamic procedure that is about problem solving and puzzle solving. And I don't like calling it problem solving because ethics is not just about risk, it's also about opportunities. So what can we do better is also an ethical question. So the pie model is bringing it from the oversight and compliance. Like we are removed and we tell you whether you did the right thing or the wrong thing, and we will scold you accordingly, to let's work together, find solutions, preferably let's implement them into the design of the consent structure, for example, and ask the question whether everything needs consent from the beginning, and end up with products that require less regulatory safeguarding. I mean, we will need a ton of safeguarding, but at least we don't have to say, well, here's another product that people love, but how are we going to deal with it now in the policy? So it's a long answer, Matilda.
Thank you, Chan. So I see that Kun is very eager to comment on this.
So I love the whole approach of solving a puzzle together, and that there's a lot of benefits together with challenges, and that is also something that Lofred really kind of mentioned, right? Look, we don't want to kind of throw out the baby with the bathwater. And I think that approach to look, there's lots of benefits to personalization, to not getting these annoying ads that I should go to high school. so there is a lot of benefits there that we can work. So in terms of consent, what I as a consumer really get annoyed with is the lack of options. And so, I mean, so Facebook is a typical example, right? So I can only consent or not consent. My running issue with Mark, so if he's listening, you know, let me hear his opinion, is that I say, look, I mean, I can estimate and calculate that I give Facebook hundreds of dollars of benefits per month. Whereas Facebook, to me, thank you for giving it for free, it's only worth about $200 in the pandemic, 100 before, right? And people have done research about this. So I want my money. Facebook. So I have sent bills and I haven't had anything back from that one. Because I'm like, well, if other companies, including, for instance, YouTube, right, or influencer marketing, can figure out how to actually reward the people instead of constantly asking me to boost my posts for me giving up more money to you, why aren't there more options? And why don't I have much more kind of direction into which kind of companies I want you to share my data with and which not? So I love options. So that
Kun, we do have some technical issues with hearing you. Can you maybe repeat the last sentence?
Yeah. So I said, so I think we need more options just to make sure consent is real. And I'm always thinking about my kids, right? So they kind of grew up on the internet. They sometimes come with me with strange conspiracy theories that I'm like, why on earth did you hear that from? And here is how you should try to debunk this and try to verify this. And here is, you know, why the next video gets recommended to you and why you may not want to get down that rabbit hole. And so the things that we do already as parents, I think we should really kind of get more formalized, you know, in schools or in extracurricular activity that get the literacy from a very young age.
Thank you very much. We are about 5 minutes to the end of the session, and I would like our panelists to give the last words from an attendee. There was an example of how AI helped create vaccines. So the future of AI is bright, and I think we all agree here if we manage to get it right, right? It's going to be bright if we manage to get it right. I would like to use these couple of minutes for our panelists to make the final notes so that we can go on doing more research in this area and bringing the researchers together to work on these difficult, wicked problems. Irakli?
Right, you said it, our future of AI is bright, and I certainly do want to believe that. I believe that this is such a powerful technology that which is going to solve the problems of healthcare, problems of education, bring solutions to the problems which we never thought were possible to be solved. And I think that this is a very powerful thing to look forward to. At the same time, future of AI should not be on the expense of our privacy, on the expense of human rights, on the expense of all these beautiful things which we like about our lives. Therefore, all together and with this type of conversations, but with translating into real actions with the policymakers, I believe that we will make it right, so that we will be finding new medicine, new vaccines to defeat different diseases, rather than living in a totalitarian societies where AI will be controlling us.
Thank you very much. Andrew?
Wow, I mean, I just want to encourage people to get involved in this umbrella of a topic where it's really, you know, probably hundreds of different research topics, quite frankly, and to, you know, I guess take risks in their research interests, thinking about it from the academic side, to explore some of these bigger questions, and try and treat them as big questions as opposed to narrow them down to just one tiny little thing. You know, that's not probably how we're going to have an impact here. We need to think bigger, and yeah, that's the sort of work that I think we need, that we want to see. And then the last point, back to what we've said many times, just to again reinforce it, is a multidisciplinary approach is absolutely essential in however you want to think about multidisciplinary, you know, and whatever that team looks like. This is a time where I think we need to think about it. And you know, for those of you who are, you know, listening and thinking, well, you know, what do I do? Well, go talk to those colleagues in other parts of your university, because, you know, insights about consumers and about what businesses do, you know, massively important in this. And, you know, I mean, not to pick on our philosophers, but my philosophy friends, you know, in Oxford at the Oxford Internet Institute, you know, we've teamed up to work on this stuff together because they need the business aspect. I need to feel smarter by hanging around with philosophers, and it's all good. I don't understand what they're saying, but you know, we can bring it back to business. But I mean, jokes aside, I think just reaching out and collaborating, and even just having interesting conversations, I think, can open up a lot of doors.
Thank you very much. Lawfred?
Well, to echo my fellow colleagues here, I'm really hopeful for the future of AI, and I just give this advice to the attendees to look what's going on in the AI quality space. But again, very interesting tools being designed on any of the issues that we have in mind. Obviously, privacy, but explainability, robustness, and so forth. And they're doing really, really interesting work. So I think that as that space grows, these tools are going to become cheaper and more affordable to any companies. And on the long run, I think that many of the issues that we are discussing right now will be kind of like solved because they will be tied to products and tools that can be embedded in the product that companies are developing. And that's for me how we're going to solve it, the same way that we solved many of the issues that we forgot about software like 30 years ago when they got into the market. So I'm really hopeful about what's come next in this AI quality startup environment.
Thank you. Chancel, how do we merge marketing with ethics and with AI, with engineers? You work in such a team. What are your final takeaways?
So I agree with everything that everyone said. Basically, what we are dealing with is a high risk and high benefit game here, and people think of ethics as completely slowing down the AI progress. It should not be this. We are also responsible making sure that ethics is not becoming this bottleneck, as most of us know, with the IRBs and the research ethics committees and laws and regulations that are done wrongly. So we have to make sure that we are much more in this dynamic, collaborative ethics, because otherwise, yeah, we are going to create tools that are going to be surveillance tools, and they are going to be the dictatorial tools. So it is really a high risk game, but also high benefit. So we should not forget about that. And going back to what Andrew said about the multidisciplinary teams, yes, definitely yes. And we need this in the way that not everybody needs to become multidisciplinary in their own brain. Like we have colleagues, like we can work with people. We have to think of this as like, if you're an expert in economics, great. We need you to work on questions that are related to AI and well-being and social benefit and all of those things. But from an economic perspective, don't try to soften your discipline and then make all those mistakes. Like everybody just should really be good in their field and come into a multidisciplinary team rather than trying to become, half CS, half econ. That just is not a good way to progress.
Thank you. Kun, as a president of the Academic Council, what would you recommend? What do you see? What are your takeaways?
So I think the two themes that really emerge for me from this wonderful conversation is number one, practicality, and number two, multidisciplinarity. So on practicality, I think it is very important for academics to get off their high horse and get their hands dirty. And so I know, especially for junior researchers, right? It's always, I would say, more straightforward to kind of try to test this grand new theory or apply this new method. But that gets you into top journals, but that is not always very practical. So talk to colleagues in other disciplines. Marketing is an applied science. Jan-Bendik Steenkamp had a wonderful speech about this yesterday, which I recommend everybody to read. So I'd be able to be practical enough to make that happen. Second point, multidisciplinary. I saw Andrew kind of smiling with that one because, and the others may not know this outside of marketing, but marketing has a lot of different streams. So the people in consumer behavior don't always talk to the people in modeling or the people in marketing strategy. And the American Marketing Association is one of these few places where we all get together. Even within marketing approach to solve a puzzle, to solve a problem. And the problems and the challenges that we want to see solved in the real world are typically the same. It's just that we have very different approaches and perspectives. We can learn from each other. And I think the AMA provides a wonderful opportunity to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you all panelists. This was, I think, very great session in my view. It also shows how much we could work together. The potential of just communicating and collaborating together is great. I also want to encourage all of the researchers, reach out to policymakers. People like Lofred and Irakli have been greatly responsive to all of the propositions that I had. They were interested in the work I was doing. Unfortunately, Del could not join us today. Reach out to these people who are working on AI from different perspectives. And if we join forces, we're going to make much more insightful impact than what we are doing with our micro puzzles every day. With that, I thank you all. I thank all of our panelists. I'm greatly indebted to you to being with us here today, and I wish you great rest of the conference.
Thank you very much, Matilda, for putting this all together. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.